Hello everyone, and this is lesson 5 in the Intro to Houdini series. So what we're going to take a look at in this lesson is something called LOPS, which is a brand new area in Houdini for lighting, look development and final rendering. So the idea behind LOPS is fairly simple, right? Usually or traditionally in Houdini before this is what your final scene would look like at object level. Okay, so you would have your geometry, you would have lights, you would have a renderer, and you would have materials. And then if you have, this is a very, very basic scene, but usually you would have more lights and you would have more, geometry pieces and everything. So the whole thing would sort of look something like this, quite scattered. You would probably make network boxes and, try to organize them and everything. So what the idea with LOPS is that you bring all of it together into a single node tree. So firstly what it does is it kind of allows you to organize everything extremely well. And it also allows you to do a lot of other things, like you can experiment with a variety of lighting situations and just switch between them. So it gives you the kind of flexibility that you were getting with SOPs, like at modeling level, but now you can do it with a full scene. So what LOPS looks like is, just to sort of give you a preview, is this is what LOPS would look like. So the first thing to remember is once you come into LOPS, it's a completely different scene. Like whatever you were having at object level is not going to be seen inside LOPS. Like inside LOPS, you build your own scene, altogether. Okay, so beyond being a look development and final render area, LOPS is also one more thing, which is it is an area for authoring USD. So USD stands for Universal Scene Description, which is a new open source format from, I believe, from Pixar. And the idea is it's sort of a layer based scene format in which you can store all of your geometry, your materials, your lights, your camera, your render information, and then seamlessly transfer it between multiple softwares. Okay, so to get started, right, I'll make a new file. And what I want to do is I want to cover some absolute basics. So I want to cover how to get your geometry into LOPS, make some more stuff in LOPS, and then add some materials and do some lighting and rendering, add a few lights in there, and then also do a little bit of light linking, and then do a final render. So I'll just start off with a simple piece of geometry. I'll take a sphere, and all I want to do is I want to create a couple of groups. So nothing too crazy, right? So I just want to come here to the front view, and I want to press 4 and select some faces and then create a group out of it. So we'll call this top, and then I'll take a group combine, and we'll say bottom is not equal to top, and then just take a null, and we will, so a null is just a dummy object, right? It's not really, like most softwares have some kind of a dummy object or a locator. So a null is essentially that. It's just useful to point things out, right? If you want to take one geometry from one folder to another, or anything from one folder to another, it's you usually take it through a null, so it's just easier to point it, like, okay, like it's called out, so go to out, and that's basically it. So we just have this one thing. The reason I created groups is so that I can show you how to import groups into LOPS as well, because the technique is slightly different. Okay, so we can take type LOP, and you'll get something called LOP network, and just jump in. It gives you this issue because it says, it requires RenderMan 23. Default Houdini sort of ships with RenderMan 22.6. 23 hasn't been released as yet, so I don't have RenderMan right now. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to take something called as a SOP import, and a SOP import allows you to import a geometry from your SOP network. So we'll just click here and we'll take out. And traditionally you want to import it, you want to click on load as reference, because it's sort of, it's a little more efficient that way. So once you hit load as reference, and you want to see, if you want to see the scene graph or the scene tree that you are developing, we can split this viewport top and bottom, and I can right click here, come to USD and say scene graph tree, and you'll see that what you have is, let's just call this as sphere. So what you have is, you have an object called sphere, and inside it there's something called mesh 0. That's what it calls everything traditionally. So the primitive path is kept to /$OS. So what that means is, like, whatever name you're giving here is the name that will come up over here. Okay, so the first thing is, we don't have our groups, right? Like if you middle click here also, or you press on the eye, you can't really see anything. It's a different context altogether. So there are two things. Like one is you have an import group option here, which is essentially, it'll actually import just that group. Like it's not importing the full object. If you say import group over here and I say import top, then it's only going to import the top group. Okay, but you're still not seeing top over there. So this is nice. If you just want to import a part of your geometry, you can import a group. But what we want is, we want to import the groups so we can assign materials to them. So what you can do is, you switch on import data, and here you can do a bunch of things. So if you want to import attributes that are there on your geometry, you can import those. But what you can do more is, you switch on subset group, and then you can import the group. So we'll pick up bottom and top, and then you'll notice that here, see, you have bottom and top. So this is how you can import groups. Okay, so along with this, I want to create a couple of other objects. So let me just create like I'll create a pig head, which will also come in with a material. So I don't want that. So what I want to do is, I want to come to materials. It makes ready-made materials for itself. I'll just clear it out. I don't want it. And I can move it up. It has some inbuilt, transform options. So I'll just scale it down a little bit. And okay. And then let's create another one. We'll create a test rubber toy. And that will also come in with a material. So I can just clear that out as well. Okay. And then let's just keep this here. Let's come into this guy. Let's keep it there. And let's merge these three. So we can just merge them together. And see, it automatically shows you, like, it's taking these in as layers. Okay, so these are traditionally automatically being treated as layers. And then I just want to rename these a little bit. So I'll just call this pig head, and I'll call this rubber toy. Okay, so the names are simpler. Now you can also, either you can merge it, or you can also take them one below the other. Like, that is also fine. Okay, you can just connect one geometry into another. And if you plug it in here, see, so this becomes layer 2, and then this becomes layer 3. And if you select it, you're getting your objects. I prefer to take it through a merge. It just, like you can sort of group it together, say this is my geometry, this is all coming in over here. But this is also perfectly acceptable. Okay, you can go either ways. But yeah, for now, I'll just sort of take all three and plug it in this way. Okay, now what I want to do is, I just want to create some materials and, assign it. So let me also I want to take a transform and move this. Yeah, maybe scale it down a little bit. Okay, and then lastly, let's also take a grid. Okay, so I'll just you'll get some basic geometry in here, like we'll just create a grid. Okay, this is good enough. Okay, now we want to create a material. Okay, so what you need to do is, you will get a node called material library and plug it in. And if you jump in over here, you come to an area called, you come into the Vex builder, where you can now start creating materials. So we will create 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So 4 and 5, because the materials we want 2 materials for the sphere, and then 1 each for, the rest of the objects. So press tab and take something called principal shader, which is the default, Houdini shader that comes in. And let's call this, let's just name them the way we want to name them. So Control C, Control V. So this is bottom, this, and then this is, let's call this toy. let's call this pig, and we'll call this floor. And let's just give them some color. So I'll make this say pink and blue. Just basic stuff, right? I'm not doing anything fancy here. And let's try green. Okay, and the floor we'll keep it to white. Okay, and then you come up and now you need to populate this. Like you need to tell that what is the material path and what is the material name. So Houdini gives you something very nice, which is you have this option here which says autofill. So switch on, click on autofill, and then whatever materials it finds inside, it will just, it takes the name of the material and then it puts in the path. Like it does that automatically for you. So you don't need to do anything. And then if you click here, you'll see that, you've generated materials. See, so your bottom, floor, pig, top, toy, which otherwise you won't see. Like if I clear these out, you'll see like there's nothing. So you have to do the autofill for, that to show up. So that is very important. Okay, then lastly, what I want to do is I want to assign materials. So I'll take an assign material, you plug it in. So what you can see now is rather than everything being very separate and you're trying to figure out what is going on, where is what geometry, where is which light, and all of that. Now you're sort of, you're almost doing all the SOP level stuff, but you're actually building a full scene. So you're assigning materials, you're going to add lights, all of that in a single node tree. So it becomes way more organized than what it was before. Okay, so now assigning materials is, fairly simple. You can just do a standard drag drop. Okay, so what I can do is with the sphere, I want the bottom and top. So like I can just in primitives drag the name of the group, okay, or the object itself, and then take the material. So I can just take bottom and drag it here and see, there you go, you've assigned your material. And then we'll add more. So we want 5 total. Let's add 3 right now. And then we'll take top and assign top. See, so as you're assigning, it starts showing up over there. Now let's take rubber toy and we'll assign toy. Yeah. And 2 more. So we want the pig. Sorry, wrong thing. Where's the pig? Yeah, so that's the pig. So the object comes on top and the material comes below. So that's the pig. And then the floor is here and that's the floor. Yeah, so there you go. So you've assigned materials to everything. Yeah, let me just take the rubber toy and move it up. Okay. All right, so this is the basic. All right, so now let's start adding some lights and we'll do a basic render. Okay, so the great thing about LOPS is you can directly render in the viewport. Okay, so that's a really nice thing. So what we'll do is I'm just going to take, again, we can plug this in directly over here as it keeps going. But what I want to do is I just want to create the light separately and then bring them in over here. Okay, so I'll just create a light. And what I can do, yeah, there is a small bug here. I think it's a Python error, but it's fine. It's not really causing any issues. And then take a merge and then we can merge these together. Okay, and then you can select the light and then we can just move this out and let's keep it here. And you have some basic options up here. So I'm going to turn this into a disk and point it in. Come to base properties and we'll just increase the intensity. And then I'll add another merge here. And I want to take a dome light. So just type in dome light. I can drop that in. And I want to take an HDR for my dome light. So I can come in here and, or no, let's not take an HDR for now. I'll just give it some color. Okay, so this is fine. And now let's, let's just render this. So I can just come down here. I can take, we can take something called Karma, which is the new renderer. Karma is still in beta. Like the older renderer was Mantra, but Karma is a lot faster. And also like the scene processing time is a lot faster. So you can just take this and connect it in there. Come to Karma and then all you need to do is click here Let me just save this file. Yeah, and I can just click here and you'll get the option. Now, the great thing about LOPS is that it's not tied up around Karma. Okay, you can install any renderer that is available within Houdini as long as it supports LOPS. Okay, so all the render engines that are available for Houdini are currently sort of building up support for it. So RenderMan 23 is going to support LOPS, and Arnold, the newer version, and also like V-Ray has announced it, Redshift has announced it. So everyone is sort of, building up support for it. So yeah, so once they release their plugins, you should be able to just install and use them. So we can just click here on Karma and it will render it. So it takes a couple of seconds, but there you go. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Now, if you don't want to see, these things in the viewport, and you can actually just navigate. So if you don't want to see the lights in the viewport, you have options over here. So if you don't want to see the selection, you can turn that off. If you don't want to see the lights, you can turn that off as well. And let's do one thing. Let's just come to the lights, and I'm just going to increase the intensity a little bit. That's looking like a Pokemon ball. Okay, let's do one thing. Let me just make a smaller render. Okay, so I'm just going to click here, go back to Houdini, and let's create a new floating panel. So I'm going to right click, come to viewer, say scene view, and then switch over to LOPNet, and then just, so it's a smaller render, so it won't eat up as many resources. And then I can click here and take Karma. So there you go. See, so that's a lot quicker. So I can just lower the intensity here. Let's add one more light, and then we'll take a look at light linking. Okay, so let me just turn this off, and I'll take another light, or let me just duplicate this. So Control C, Control V. We'll plug this in, and I'll just move this to a side. Okay, so let me just hit Karma, and yeah, so let's do light linking. Okay, so what you can do is if you type in light, you'll get something called light linker. Okay, and you can drop that in the middle, and it's a pretty nice thing. So what you get is you get your lights on the left and you get your geometry on the right. And let me just come in here, and I'm going to just color these. Okay, so this one I want it to be yellow, and the second light I want it to be pink. And also let's come into the material and make the floor brighter. So I'll pick up the floor and I'll just make it brighter. Okay, so now what I want to do, as I said, is I want to essentially just link the lights. So let's also take the dome light. I'll make it a little bit bluer. Okay, so the way it works is fairly simple. Let's say that for the sphere, or let's say the toy and the pig should not be affected by the yellow light. So what I can do is I can actually take the pig head and the rubber toy, and you have an option up here which says create new collection from current selection, which is, it'll just group these together. Okay, so I can just click on this and we'll just call it toys. So it will create a collection called toys, and I can drop this here, and it has a very basic option. It says what light will be affected by it, or what lights will be affecting it and what lights won't be affecting it. So I can just take light 1 and drop it in the not affect area, and that's essentially it. Okay, if let's say I also drop in the dome light here, see, so now these two are not getting affected by the dome light either. They're just being affected by the pink light. Okay, or like if I want to remove one of them, I can just pick the dome light and just remove it. See, so now okay, so let's say if I don't want the grid to be affected by the dome light for some reason, so I can just take the grid. Okay, now when you select the grid, the other rule disappears. If you want to see everything, just turn this off, like filter based on selection. Then you'll keep seeing everything. So I can take the grid and drop it. It creates a new folder for it. And I can take the dome light and drop it in the not effect. See, so now the floor is not being affected by the dome light. So it's very easy to do stuff like this. And then let's also take the sphere and we'll say the sphere is not being affected by light 2. So now light 1 is only affecting, the central sphere and the grid. And light 2 is only affecting, the pig and let's do one thing. Let's also, like, we can take this guy, and maybe the grid is also not being affected by light 2. Yeah, see. So it's very easy to do this stuff, like just very easily you can have, links happening or not happening, stuff like that. The other thing that you can also do, and then if you don't want it, right? So this is where it becomes nice, is that if you don't want it, you can just, shake this and remove it and you come back to normal. Okay. So which otherwise in a traditional system, you would have to go back to the light linker and, turn things on and off and remove all of the rules. Here you just disconnect the whole thing and, you're back to normal. So it's very easy to do this stuff, which you couldn't do before. The other thing you can also do is there is something very nice called as a light mixer. Okay, so a light mixer is essentially you get this really nice little area where you can drop in your lights, and then you get this really nice little slide or control. So if you want to change colors, you can change colors. If you want to, like, let's make this blue. Let's say I want the dome light to be green. I don't know, like whatever you want to do. And you want to control intensities. It's very easy to control intensities. You want to control the intensity of the dome light. Okay. So all of that stuff is very easy to do. Yeah, okay, I think everything has gotten too bright. See, so I can pretty much just turn off everything in one shot. Okay, so if I just want to sort of, test out, and what you can also do is you have other options, which is pretty nice, is you can actually like solo stuff. Okay, so let's say if I take this and I bring it up, and then if you want to see this as a sheet, you can see it as a sheet. And the great thing here is, okay, let me just lower the intensity of the dome light. And I can just come to the sheet, and if I want to solo anything, I can just solo it. Okay, so it's very easy to work with, if you just want to affect your lighting and just see how it's working, you can very easily do those things. Yeah, and then let's add a camera. So I'll just turn this back to Houdini GL, and I can take a camera and click here, and we can go to camera view. By default, it will be on the ground, so we just need to sort of readjust it. And I'll come to the view and make it about 35 degrees. Yeah, and so here also, like, I can just look through camera. And let's do one thing. Let's turn off the selection and this thing. Yeah, and then if you want to do a final render, you can do a final render. Okay, so what we can do is I can just come here. I can come to Karma, and if you come to rendering, you have some basic options here. So you can do number of samples, and you have light sampling quality. So what I'll do is I just want to do a very quick render. So I'm going to bring the light samples down to 4. It's going to be very noisy. And I'll come to images, click here, and we'll say sequence of EXR files. You can keep it to anything. And by default, it will save it to a folder called render inside the folder where your file is saved. Okay, so my file is saved here in intro files lesson 5, but I just want to save it where it is because I don't have a folder called render. So I can just delete this. So it'll take the name of the file and then, a $OS and then whatever is the frame number, but I'll turn it to JPEG. And I want the render size to be like pretty small. So we'll do 640x480. And what I'll do is I'll come to render and turn on scheduler, which will show me the progress. And let me save this file, and I can just hit render. So it default picks up the camera that you have. If there's more than one camera, you can pick up those as well. And then hit save to disk. And so this will kick off and should be done in a while. Yeah, so that's basically it. I upped the samples to 24, which still isn't enough, but I don't really want to waste time. But yeah, usually it's kept to 128, which is a good enough value. But 24 is a little low, like it will come in pretty grainy. But yeah, there you go. So this is your basic render. Now, another thing that you can do before we close this is you can also turn on optics denoiser, which comes inbuilt. So let me just turn that on. So if you, what you can do is you can come to images and turn on optics denoiser. And then if we bring this in, and if I switch over to Karma, then you will get an option down here which says enable denoising. So when you turn it on, it will take a few seconds because it needs to kick off the GPU, because the denoising happens on the GPU. And it is pretty much dependent on, since it's optics, it's dependent on NVIDIA GPUs. It's not going to work on AMD, at least not to my knowledge. So if you are going to use this, you have to be on an NVIDIA card. But then now it's sort of like when you render it, it'll give you, now it sort of kicks off the denoiser. But yeah, so this is as far as, the basics of LOPS is concerned. Okay. All right, so now let's move on to something slightly more complicated, which is how to do instancing in LOPS, and also how to generate attributes and use those attributes to affect materials in LOPS. So what I have is I built this really, like, it looks a little complicated, but it's mostly fair. It's pretty simple. I made this really silly looking plant-like thing. And what I have is I have three different variations of them. I have a sphere and a box and a torus. And just to show you what it is, it's essentially, I just have a line and then I resampled it to get some points on it. And also because I wanted to generate like the curve view. Okay. And then I created a group of the top point, using the end value. And then I created a group of the middle points. I skipped the first and the end points. Okay. Like 15 of the beginning and 3 from the end. And then I did 1 of every 2. So I'm selecting some stuff in the middle. Okay. And then I have a P scale. Okay. Which is generating a ramp like that based on the curve view. So all of the stuff that we've done in the previous lesson. And then I do a bend. Okay, and then I use an orientation along curve, so it will sort of, flow along the curve. And then I have some basic grids which I have copied on, the middle points. The basic line gets a polywire. And then on the top, I copy a sphere. Now, the other important thing is I put each one of them in a group so that I can adjust that when I go to LOPS. And then I also created a wrangle and created a vector attribute for the leaves. Okay, you can also create a float attribute, but I wanted to create a vector because I want to modify the color. So I created an attribute called v at leaves and just kept it at 1. Okay, and the same thing happens for the flower, which is I have an attribute called v at flower is equal to 1. And then I just duplicated that 3 times or 2 times more. And this is for the box and this is for the torus, and they have the same group name and they have the same attribute. Okay, so just 3 different variations of the same thing. Okay, so I have my flower and I have like 3 flowers, basically that. Okay, so now let's come into LOPS and we will import this. So I'll come into LOP network and I'll take a SOP import and click load as reference and then just pick up out flower A, and I'll call this flower A. And let's split this. I'll close that. I'll split this top bottom so we can see the scene graph. The scene graph is important because when you want to assign materials and stuff, it becomes a lot easier. So we have flower A mesh 0, and let's set this one up because the other 2 are going to be exactly the same. So I'll just come into import data. I'll turn on attributes and we want the flower attribute and the leaves attribute. And then come into subset groups and just pick up all 3. So you'll see that You can also try to do a star, which will hopefully do the same thing. See, so all the groups essentially get brought in, and then just duplicate this. So Control C, Control V. This will be flower B, and then Control C, Control V, and this will be flower C, and the same thing up here. So I'll get flower B, and then this is flower C. Okay. And then I can just merge these together. So if I just take a merge, so 1, 2, and 3, and you'll see that you basically created 3 layers. So that's good enough. Now let's quickly do instancing. Okay, because it's actually pretty simple. You don't need to do anything too fancy. But see, there you go. So we just have everything merged together. So let's take a look at instancing. So what you do is if you type an instance, you'll get something called instance to points. What this is essentially is actually a geometry folder. Like if you come in here, you'll notice that you are actually at geometry level, and default it has an add node in there, okay, which is generating like 1 point. Like if you click there, you'll see there's 0.0. And if I just plug this in to the second input, and it will generate, it's basically doing instancing. So what you can do is you can turn off use entire stage, and it will automatically randomize between, whatever is existing. So if I start to switch through, or if I jump to index, and this is 0, and this is 1, and this is 2. Okay, so pretty simple. But if you want to be a little more organized, what you can do is we can create a collection out of this. So let's do something called as stage manager, and just plug this in. And here we can create like a folder, and then, just call, because let's say if you connected 10 objects in there and you want to create an instance of just, 4 of them. So this will, if you just connect it directly into instancing, it will use everything. Okay. So what you can do is I can just click here, and I can create a folder called flowers, and then just take all of this and drop it in there. Okay. So you've created a folder and have that. And then we want to convert this into what's called a collection. So we'll take a collection, and you need to name the collection. So we'll call it flowers. And where does it need to look for? So it needs to look into this collection called flowers. Okay. So what you do is you just come in here, and we do /flowers. And when you do slash again, it's asking what, you can just put a star in there. So it'll just pick up everything. And then inside the instance, you plug this into the instance. And here in the prototype primitives, we say %, and the name of the collection, which is flowers. Okay, so if you come up here, see, this is the name. This is the name that we have, collection named flowers, and that's what we use. So the advantage of this is, like, if I add a grid here, or let's say if I take a sphere and I add in these two as well, because my stage only has, my flower folder only has those, when I come to my instance and I go through it randomly, see, it never brings up the sphere or the grid. Okay, which it can, if I don't do this, or if I add in the grid into this, it will bring it up. So if I come back to my stage manager, and then I drop the grid in there, and now if I come back, and if I start to change, see, you do get the sphere every once in a while. So this is the advantage of having the stage manager and the collection, because then you can sort of just say, okay, we have 20 objects, but I want to instance only these 10. Okay. Or you can have multiple of them and have multiple instances, and then each one can use something different. So let me just remove that. Yeah, just drop it onto the root, and that's good. Okay, so we're back to this. Now let's, do something better with this, because this is just a single point. So what you can do is jump in, and I can create a grid, and you'll immediately see it sort of, do what it's supposed to do, which is, see, it's randomizing between the sphere and the torus and the box. Now what I can do is I can take a scatter. So there you go. So it's scattering it. Let's do one thing. Let's do what we had done, previously, which is we can use the index value. So I can come up here and set this to index, or actually set it to index attribute. So we can generate an index attribute, and whatever is the attribute value is what it will use. So jump in here, and then if I take a wrangle, and let's say if I just create I at index, I at index is equal to 1. And see, so if I drop it here, like after the scatter, let's call this index. And so if it is 0, you'll see the sphere. When it is 1, you'll see the cube. And when it is 2, you'll see the torus. But what I want is, let's say if we can use a noise map and scatter them that way, that would be nice. Okay, so let's keep this to 0, and let's come into the scatter, and we'll create a noise, an attribute noise. I'll call it C and keep it to 1D. And let's try to work with this. So I'll come in here and we'll say, let's do ch ramp, and I'll pick up, let's call this I, and we'll pick up at C and click this. And let's see if this works. So firstly, let's come in here and we'll say remap it to 0 to 1. And then here, let's try something. Like, let's take this to 2. See, so there you go. So you're getting some amount of stuff happening. Okay, but let's do one thing. Okay, so because we can directly just set this as high as we want. But yeah, let's set both of these to constant. So this is constant and that is constant. And I'll set this here. Right, so this one is 1. And then I'll take another one, or let's take this, and this is 2. So you're getting a step, but there you go, see. So what you're getting is you're getting this nice little, and let's also do one thing. Let's take a p scale. So we'll do at p scale is equal to the same thing, but a different name. So we'll do Control C, Control V, let's call it PS. Sorry, yeah, you don't have a semicolon at the end. That's why there was a problem, but there you go. See, so now the sphere will be the smallest, and these guys are the largest, like the torus is the largest. And then we can add like a randomize. So we'll do an attribute randomize. Let's set this to orient. And we'll set this to 4. And this is 0 and this is 0. And that is -1. So we get like, random distribution like this. And I can come back to my attribute noise. I can come back to my index and maybe adjust it a bit more. So let's keep this, a little bit like that. And let's also take the attribute noise and make it bigger. So I want less roughness and bigger in size. See, there you go. Yeah, and let's try to adjust this a bit more. So index and see, so you can see the torus values actually adjusting. Yeah, or let's go the other way around, like let's make this smaller. Yeah, there you go. See, so that looks a little bit better. And if we want, we can up the scatter. Let's make this about 4,000. Yeah, see, so now you can very clearly sort of, find the difference. So let's take this, let's make it small, or let's keep this big enough, and then we can try to sort of differentiate between those. Yeah, so not bad. Yeah, so you have like 3 ranges then. Like the biggest ones are the spheres, and then the middle ones are the cube, and then the smaller ones are, are the torus. See, so you can actually like do something like that. And then if I take the attribute noise and adjust it, see there, that's how it works. So it's a pretty nice way to do this stuff. Okay, so now that we have, built this really random field, let's start assigning materials to it, and then we'll randomize the materials. All right, so now that we have finished instancing, let's start assigning some materials. So I'll just open up my USD scene graph, and let's create a material library, which we can drop in the middle. So this is, I think this is like it's probably like a Python error. It's a bug. It'll probably go away in the next build. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in, and yeah, let's do one thing. This sphere that I had made, this is pointless because I was just trying to show something. So we'll get rid of that. Okay, so I'll just jump into the material library. I need 3 materials, I need 3. I'm not going to give anything to the grid. So I need one for the plants, one for the stem, and then one for the flower. So I'll just take a principal shader, and let's call this flower, and I'll make it reddish or pink. Okay, and then these are the leaves. Let's make that like greenish, and this is the stem, and we'll make it like a light brown. Okay, and then come up here and say autofill, so you'll get your materials, and then let's take an assign material, and we'll just assign them. Now assigning is a little different this time, because what we have is we have 3 objects and they all have the same group name. So how you can assign now is, let's say I take the flower group from flower A and I drop it over here, and then I take the flower material and I assign it. So you'll notice that only the sphere turns pink. Okay, and the box and the torus haven't turned pink. So what we can do is, that's actually flower ABC. So if I replace the A with a star, it will assign to everything that is called flower. Okay, so that's how you do it. So when you have 2-3 objects which have similar names, or you should actually keep it that way. So you give them similar names, but with an ending that is either numerical or ABC, and then just replace it with a star, when it comes time to assigning materials. So we'll create 2 more. And so we want leaves and we want stem, and then assign the material. So this is leaves and that is stem, and then just replace the same thing. So this is star, yeah, and then this is also star. Yeah, okay. So this is where we are. So we've assigned our shader, and we have this. And let's just hit a render and see what we get. So the grid, actually I can bring in later, so I can just take the grid here, and even if you want, you can actually plug it in the first input. Okay, so this becomes like a floor for it. So you can do that as well, like even that works. So we'll just make it slightly bigger. And then let's take a dome light, and I will give it an HDR. So let me just pick up something. So I'll pick up this one. You can pick up anything, like I won't share the HDR, but you can take an HDR from HDR Haven or whatever you have, like it's fine. And then let's take Karma and we'll hit a render. Okay, so I'll create a new window. So we'll say scene view. Yeah, when you unlock it, it jumps to, where you are supposed to be. And then just change this to Karma. And if you've done everything right, we should see our materials. So there you go. See, so you have your materials. If you don't want to see the dome light, just turn this off, which says display light guides. And you can spin it around. So yeah, so we have our, object with materials. All right, so now what we want to do, which is why we've created all of this, is I want to randomize these materials. Okay, so I want to randomize the material on the leaves and the material on the flowers. So the way to do it is the two attributes that we had created, right? So if we come to our objects and we have those two attributes that we have, flower and leaves. And what you can do is, if we come into our material library, and I'm going to bring in those two attributes. So we'll take a bind, and they were vector attributes. So we take 3 floats and we call it flower, and I'll do Control-C, Control-V, and this is leaves. And I can just plug in, and I'll plug them into the base color. Okay, so they both go into base color. So if we render right now, it should all just be white. Just hit a restart. If it again keeps showing you pink. Yeah, so there you go. So it's all white. Yeah, so we're good. So the question that comes up now is, how do you randomize this? So there is a specific reason why I took, or why I created the two attributes. Because the basic way that you can randomize a material via instancing is that a material, the base color, the attribute or the parameter is actually just called base color. Okay, so like, one word. And if I created an attribute called base color and randomized it, it will do the work. So just to show you that, okay, I'll just disconnect these and let me just hit Karma and again just hit restart, because sometimes it doesn't update. So what I can do is, if I come into my instance and then you take an attribute randomize, and we'll call it base color. And here as well, it's a vector because it's the actual color value. So we will set it to, the dimension should be 3, and we'll set the attribute name to base color. And this is fine. It's 0 to 1. It's just randomizing it. We plug it in, and then you come to the top, and it has this area which says point attributes to copy, and we type in base color. So the attribute that you had created. So if you've done everything, what's going to happen is hopefully this. So what it's done is it's randomized everything, because every material has the same parameter, right? So every material has a parameter called base color. So when you randomized base color, everything got randomized. So when you want to randomize just specific properties, okay, so this is another thing to remember is, if you come into your material and if you look at, any of these, then this is a parameter called IOR, or this is a parameter called rough. Okay, so when you want to, if you want to take a material and just randomize the roughness value, you can just create an attribute called rough at instance level, and that will work. But in our case, what we want is, I just want to randomize the flower color, okay, or the leaf color. So now I can just plug in the flower to base color. Let's come back to our instance. And I'm going to not use base color. I'll rename this to flower. Okay. And come to point attributes to copy and change this to flower as well. And if you've done everything right now what should happen is, see, Alright, so we've randomized, the color of the flowers, but let's say if you don't want to randomize it, let's say we want to base it on, the noise map that we had created. So let's jump back into the point instance. Let's also take the, let's call this index and scale. Okay, let's just call it index. I think it's causing some problems. Yeah, okay. Yeah, let me just come down here. Let's just adjust these scale values. Maybe I don't want them to be that small. Yeah, those ones are like a little too tiny. Yeah, okay, I think that's better. Okay, so now what I can do is instead of, let's call this, yeah, let's just disconnect this. And what I can do is I can take another wrangle. So let's take an attribute wrangle. And let's do one thing. Let's take the noise attribute that we had created, and this might be a little difficult to display here, but it will hopefully show up when we render it. So what I can do is, let me take a color. I want to set a color based on the noise map. So I'll say ram from attribute and it's C, and we have this. And then what I can do is I can take my flower attribute. So v at flower is equal to at CD. So what that should do is it should take the color that we are generating here and transfer it to my flowers. Okay, let's see if that works. Yeah, so if I hit render, and there you go, see. So you can see the noise map being spread out. So so the bigger ones are now getting like the black color and the smaller ones are getting white. So if I come into my my color map, and now I can set color. So let's say these ones should be pink, the way they're supposed to be. And then it becomes slightly, say, yellowish. And then the smallest ones are, like more yellow, like that. And let me just sort of bring this in. Yeah, so there you go. See, so now, the smaller ones are greenish, and then the cubes are, a little more orange, and then the big ones are pink or purple, whatever. So this is how you can sort of, not just randomize, but we can use the existing attributes and adjust colors. So similarly, let's say I want to also modify, the leaf color. So let's come back in here again, and I will create, let's call this as flower. And let's come back, let's put another, we'll put a randomize. Let's call it leaves. So the attribute name should be the same name that you have created. So it will be leaves. And what I want to do is I just want to keep it to green. And let's try 0.2 to about 0.5. So what should happen is we should mostly just get a very dark green. And then come to instance to points, and here we'll type in leaves. And then just make sure that if we come up to our material library, then the leaves is connected to base color. Okay, so now let's see if everything works. So if I come in here and I hit karma, and see, there you go. So the leaves have gone to like a darker green. If we zoom in, we should be able to see it. So I'll just scale it up. And see, so the leaves are, dark and light green, and then the flowers are getting, the colors that we have decided. So this is how you can actually, not just randomize values, like we can randomize it further. Like let's come into instance to points, and I'll make this 0 to 1. Let's also add a little bit of reddish to this. So let's make it 0.2 and 0.7. 0.7 might be a little too much. Let's try 0.5. Okay, and then let's also do one thing. Let's come to the flower color here and let's make this something else. What can we make it? Okay, let's make it blue just for fun, so that, and let's make this a slightly richer color as well. So we'll make it reddish or more orange. Okay, and let's make this slightly dark. And yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so if I zoom out a little and we look at them, see, so the leaves have more variation now. And so the small torus, they are blue, and then the boxes are more orange, and then these are, All right, so this is how you can instance objects and you can randomize them, and you can also use the attributes that you have created to randomize their shaders, in any which way that you want. All right, so now let's take a look at a final scene where I just want to do some basic sort of like PBR shading and rendering. Okay, so I have built a scene, but we'll sort of build it again from scratch. And what I have is, I just have this base object that I have, and I have a rubber toy. Okay, and then we're just going to create a shader for it. So I built a shader for this in Substance Painter, and I have the 4 basic. So I have the diffuse, the roughness, the metallic, and the bump map, and then we'll just apply it and do a render. Okay, so I'm just going to create a LOP network. I have one that already exists, but we'll build one from scratch. So I'll just go into SOP import. Let's call this toy, and I'm going to load up the toy, and I'll duplicate this. I'll call this as base, and we will load up base, and let's merge these together. You can also take them, as I said, you can also take them one after the other, which is also fine. But usually I just like to merge them, like that. It just, I think it's just the way I normally work in SOP. So it kind of, makes sense to me. So I'll just take a transform here. I just want to make this slightly smaller. So I'm going to bring it up and then make it slightly smaller. Okay. And then, so let's just zoom in. Let's create a camera. So we'll switch to camera. Okay, let's open up a new floating panel and we'll set it to scene view. So this will be our render window. Okay, so let's do the same thing. So we'll create a material library, and I'll create 2 principal shaders. So let's call this as toy, and let's call this as base, and we'll come up and say autofill, and then let's split our viewport top bottom and take the scene graph tree, and then we can do assign material. So the scene graph tree is useful because when you want to assign materials, you can just do a drag drop, like that is very helpful. So this comes to base, and then that is the toy, and it gets this. Okay. And then let's put in a dome light. So I want to take a dome light and then just give it, this HDR that I have. And then we'll take, even if you don't take karma, it will still automatically, look up karma and start rendering. But having this gives you more control. Okay, so we can just take this and switch on karma, and yeah, so there you go. So you have your basic scene, which is great. All right, so now let's just assign the shaders. Okay, so I'll come into material library, and if I come to the toy, the principal shader has an area where you can just pick up textures. But what you want to do is you want to get your base color to 1, because what it does traditionally is it will multiply this color with the texture. Okay, so just take this and make it white. Okay, so that is important. Okay, so now we'll come to textures. I'll switch on use texture, and then I'll click here, and I have my basic textures. So I'll pick it up, and you'll also see it in the viewport. Like if I just, hide this a little bit, And here again, like if I turn on final rendering, see, so you should be able to see it. Or even without it, see, so you can see that over here. Okay, and then I want something for the metallic. So I'll turn that on and I'll pick up metallic. Yeah. Okay, and then, yeah, let's get metallic to 1 over here. Yeah, there you go. So that, this is important. Like you do need to just adjust the value over here as well. And then, we'll get the roughness slightly high, or actually no need, but let's just take the roughness and then we will, pick up the roughness from here. Yeah, let's do one thing. Let's see what happens. So we'll get the roughness to 1. Yeah, so that sort of multiplies it with, the existing. And then lastly, I'll just pick up a bump map. So I'll click here, I'll change the texture type to bump, and I'll pick up the height. Yeah, so if I make this slightly bigger, so there you go. Okay, you have your basic. Yeah, the bump I'll get it to 0.01 because I think it's a little too much. And the great thing about Karma is that by default, it has certain passes on already. So if you come into render variables, and you will see that it has these whole bunch of passes that it's already turned on. If you want to see them, you can just click here, this little icon. So you can say viewing output, and if you want to see the diffuse, if you want to see the glossy reflection, if you want to see the normals, or this, all of this has UV, so we can see the UVs. And like it has volume on, we don't want volume, so we can turn that off. Let's say you want to have indirect diffuse as well. So now you can get indirect diffuse. And that's essentially it. So now if you want to render it, we can just come into rendering, and I will turn on, I'll come to images, output picture, and I can say output EXR file. I'll change this to just, where the file is stored, because I don't have a folder called render. And I'll make this small. So let's do, 640, 480. And yeah, I'll set the rendering samples to about 64. Okay, and let's hit a render. So I'll just close this. I'll save the file. And I'll open up my scheduler so I can see the progress, and let's hit save to disk. Yeah, so there you go. So this is our render. And if you click here on top on the C, then you can see all the, so the depth pass is actually like a full 32-bit. So that's why you don't see it. So what you can do is if you click here, it will readjust the pixel range, and there's your depth map. So then you have the diffuse, and you have the glossy reflection, and the indirect diffuse. So all the passes that you had, those are stored here. So before I close, there's one final thing I want to show, which is also like a really neat little thing you can do because of LOPS, is because it's a node-based structure, you don't need to turn lights on and off to test your settings. Okay, what you can do instead is, let me just open up my render window again. Not really a render window, I'm just, rendering through this. Yeah, but what I can do is, let me turn that off temporarily. Is if I duplicate my dome light, and let's say I take, another dome light here, another HDR here. And what I can do is I can actually do a switch. So this is where it becomes nice, is I'll just, I'll keep them separate. I'll take a merge here. And what I have is I have these dome lights coming in through a switch. And if I plug this in, what happens is if I hit render, you can actually switch between, multiple HDRs or multiple light setups actually. So if I take this switch and I switch to 1, see, I have a different dome light. Okay. So it's very easy to sort of, let's say if I adjust this, coming in from here, I'll adjust the exposure a little bit. Yeah. So I have one dome light, which is like this, and I can come in here to my switch and I can check, a completely different dome light. And then maybe if I want to have, just a single, area light coming from top just for fun, like let me just put in an area light here and I'll just zoom out. We'll go to 3, or 2. And let me come up. I'll change this to, let's say disk. And let's say if I want this to also have a dome light, so I'll do Control C, Control V, and we can merge these two together. So what's going to happen is when I hit Karma, so what I have is I have this one light here, which let me just increase the intensity. Let me try to make it, I don't know, yellow. Okay, see, so you can see that on top. And I can push it to a side here. There we go. Okay, so we have this one light, and then if I don't want that, I can go to 2. So this is just the dome light, and then if I come to 0, then it's a completely different HDR altogether. Okay, so this is the end of it, of our entire lesson on LOPS. But I just wanted to show this so you get an idea of, what is the advantage of this, right? Like why have this node-based way to build your scene is because you can do stuff like this. You can actually have like multiple scenes and multiple light setups. Like you can have an interior and you can have a daytime setup and a nighttime setup and just switch between them with a single, switch input, like it's as simple as that. So that is why a system like this is pretty radical. You can do a lot more with this, which otherwise through a standard way would definitely take a lot longer or actually be a lot complicated, right? Like if you have 4 different light setups and then, you turn on those lights, you turn off these lights, takes a lot longer to do. But anyways, this is the basics of LOPS, and that's basically it.